like to introduce everyone and get us started off today. That'd be great.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nicole. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's so awesome to see people from all over the country and have the leisurely ability to read that while we're kind of working on housekeeping stuff. Thank you so much for joining. So I am Shannon Peterson. I am president of the Young Adult Library Services Association, and I am also a youth services manager in Kitsap County, which is on the Puget Sound, a semi-rural library system just across from Seattle. And not to be too personal, but just as an aside, I'm also the mother of a young toddler whose passions include licking random things. So I have a bit of a cold today. So for that, I apologize. Hopefully I don't get too hacky into the microphone. So I'm so pleased to be participating in this first of a month-long series on various components of the newly released Future of Teens in Libraries report. For those of you that aren't aware, this report was the product of a year-long IMLS-funded grant project in which YALSA talked to the library community, outside stakeholders, to explore how libraries might serve teens successfully in the 21st century and what that looks like. I'm sure you've all read the report and memorized it probably too, but it looks at the changing demographics of teens and the landscapes that they are currently embedded in and sort of how that's shifting and changing. It also looks at multiple pathways in which libraries might adapt their efforts moving forward. So to explore these pathways, as I mentioned, YALSA, and as Nicole mentioned, YALSA will hold a month-long series on various themes or components of the report. And each of these chats is Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern. So please visit that YA forum page for a schedule of our upcoming chats. All that said, I'm super, super excited to be kicking off today's conversation with two colleagues whose work related to youth learning has and will continue to broadly impact the library world. Mimi Ito, hello Mimi, is a cultural anthropologist of technology use, examining children's and youth's changing relationship to media and communications. She's the professor in residence and John T. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Chair of the Digital Media and Learning at University of California, Irvine. She's also the research director of the Digital Media and Learning Hub at UC Irvine and chair of the MacArthur Research Network on Connected Learning, in addition to a million other amazing things. So thank you so much for joining us today, Mimi. We also have Crystle Martin, who
Thanks for having me.
Hi, who is a postdoctoral research fellow for the Connected Learning Research Network at the Digital and Learning Hub at UC Irvine. Her dissertation from the University of Wisconsin-Madison focused on learning and information literacy in the World of Warcraft community. And her current research focuses on youth learning in fan communities. She's also, as of like 2 weeks ago, I think, the recipient of a YALSA Henny grant for work related to connected learning in library environments, which is super awesome. Welcome, Crystle. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before we dig into today's conversation, I'd also like to just quickly mention that if you haven't, you probably have, but if you haven't visited Connected Learning TV to check out some of the amazing work and resources that's available there, be sure to do that as well. And as we go through today's chat, I'll do my best to sort of incorporate the conversation that's going on in the chat box. But definitely please use that chat box to sort of further ideas that we're talking about. And I hope to have extra time at the end to just really dig into direct questions as well. So feel free and comfortable to use that as your additional community today during our chat. So I'm going to kick off the conversation with sort of a big overarching question. Mimi and Crystle, can you share a general overview of the Connected Learning Framework for members that may not yet be familiar?
Sure, I'd be happy to jump in on that. Hopefully my audio is working okay. It seems like we have a little bit of a lag, but just tell me in the chat if it's not working out for you all. So the Connected Learning Framework really came out of research
I
that
don't know
a
if you
large team of
hear,
us have been doing on an ongoing basis
but
with how.
I'll give it a try. Um, so connected learning framework incorporates looking. Oh, there we go.
I think it seems like there's a lag um, with my audio, but are you hearing me okay now? Um, so, okay, I'm going to start again. Uh, okay, so yeah, it really has come out of work that we've been doing, for many years, really going on about 10 years now with young people and trying to understand how they're learning through the use of new media, and also, even in interests that are not necessarily highly new media focused, but trying to understand how new technologies and our new information ecology and interactive technologies like games and media production tools can really support young people's learning in what they're really interested in and passionate about, and that's relevant and connected to their lives. Uh, we found when talking to young people that almost all of them had interests, things that they were passionate about learning, ways they wanted to contribute to their communities. But for a lot of young people, those activities and interests were often disconnected from educational opportunities and ways of connecting to the adult world, career opportunities, to civic participation. So we found that especially with the new media environment, young people were even more engaged in their interests, engaged in social connectivity, but that there was a persistent disconnect from those activities where they were engaged and those connections to education and the other kinds of learning that grown-ups and educators and parents care most about. So the connected learning framework was really built from these core observations of youth behavior and is an effort to say, given where youth are, where their interests and their social engagements are, how can we connect those interests and engagements more effectively to the kinds of learning environments, the relationships that are intergenerational in nature, and the outcomes that we really care about, which are academic, civic, and career-oriented in nature. And so connected learning is a descriptive framework for describing what happens, what learning looks like when you can connect young people's interests, their social and peer engagements, and opportunity as it connects to those three areas: civic, career, and academic outcomes. It's also not just a descriptive framework, but a kind of guiding template for thinking about design, program development, a set of values and guiding principles for what we can do as educators, as parents, as technology designers, as policymakers to support more of these connected learning experiences for young people. So we find that when young people are experiencing this uh, connectivity between their interests and their social lives and opportunity, that these environments are often characterized by a set of features or design principles. And we stress three in particular. One is that there is a focus on production and self-expression. So not just information intake, but actually producing and sharing and having voice. The second is that these environments are what we call openly networked, that they're connected across spheres and environments. So it's not just a single location, but any given learning environment has relationships, connectivity, visibility to other parts of young people's lives, and the kind of real world opportunities that they really care about. And finally, that these environments have a sense of shared purpose that is ideally intergenerational in nature. In other words, people are doing meaningful things together and have a sense of shared culture, identity, and purpose that's guiding their activities. So it's not simply a learning task that's sequestered from something meaningful, but there's relevance, a sense of relevance and purpose baked into the activity that young people are engaged in. So those are just some of the examples of the design principles that we believe drive those experiences that connect young people's learning experiences across these often disconnected areas.
Thanks, Mimi. My next question, you sort of addressed with the concept that this is like a template for thinking about design principles. But I guess digging into more of what that looks like in libraries, and maybe this is a Crystle question. So what advice would you give to a librarian that's just getting started with this? Is it sort of thinking about it in that template kind of framework? Where can folks start?
Do you want to take this question, Mimi?
Crystle, do you want to take that?
Oh, okay. So
Sure,
I think
I'm
that
happy to.
librarians can start
Yeah, so I
from
think
a lot of practices that youth librarians already engage in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mimi. Oh, go ahead.
you go ahead, Crystle. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So I think that some of the
Yeah,
practices
so a
that
lot
youth
of times when
librarians
we
already engage in are very close to or part of the connected learning framework because um, you're already looking at service, and in the the Future of Teen Libraries report or Teens and Libraries report, there's talk about being youth librarians being bridges and connectors for both from teens to technology and from teens to other institutions. And so I think that what teen librarians can already take from what they're already reading in the Future of Teens and Libraries report is that being a bridge or a connector is a really important part of their role in connected learning. And so one more thing that they need to think about is being the connector for education or for learning. Mm-hmm. And part of that is like looking at what teens are interested in and then trying to help them bridge that gap back to learning, because you find teens doing really interesting things in all kinds of spaces. So my dissertation work was on World of Warcraft and how teens used information literacy practices around World of Warcraft. My current work is about studying connected learning in WWE, professional wrestling fan communities. And so they may seem like unlikely places for youth to be doing lots of learning-related activities, but what is actually happening is they're using and improving writing skills, using and improving digital media skills, and a lot of them don't have a good way of figuring out that those skills are valuable and could be valued by traditional educational institutions, and B, how to actually take those practices back to their academic settings. And I think that's where librarians can really play a great role, because they have a little more freedom than teachers in a classroom who are more constrained by the nature of a classroom. And I think that just getting started is looking at what teens are doing and what kind of what kind of involvement you can have in their practices.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And I think what you related to what you were saying is that so many libraries really are doing this work and doing it well. It's really interesting and impactful to have the language to sort of talk about what we're doing in a different way and maybe think a little more broadly in some areas. So yeah, it's so interesting to hear from the two of you about this. So, I guess to go a little bit to the side of what you were just talking about, Crystle, from your experience, how does connected learning in libraries differ from what it looks like in other environments, like online or in classrooms? Or you spoke to a little bit about what advantages libraries might have, but if you could just speak a little more about about what connected learning looks like in other environments?
So connected learning, I'll talk more on the interest-driven side because that's my strongest, that's where I do most of my research. I would say that um, what youth do really well in their interest spaces is connecting their interests and their peer sphere, but connecting back to the academic sphere is sometimes where they have the most trouble. And from the people that I've seen, like the participants that I've had in my research, one of the spaces where you see really interesting connected learning is where youth have accidentally uh, found an outside mentor or have strategically found an outside mentor who's helped them, or a caring adult, or it could be another peer who's helped them bridge back to an academic focus. Maria, one of my participants from my professional wrestling case, uh, found through her interest in professional wrestling that she was very interested in writing, and through talking to her English teacher about it, she got involved in the school newspaper and then is taking a career in college, or a course in college for medical technical degree, and so she's hoping to use what she developed through creative writing and how she developed her skills through that uh, um, as part of medical technical writing, as a way to take her interest and turn it into a long-term sort of path for her. And I think it's a little harder in kind of school settings because of the constraints of schools, where teachers, they have a certain amount that they have to get through in 50 minutes. They have 30 kids or more in a classroom, and there's a lot of other things at play there that restrict their time and their ability to kind of involve interest, although it's not impossible. It depends on your school and your classroom and how much input as a teacher you have, where I think as in libraries, they have a really great ability to involve youth interest in the activities, and they also have a great opportunity to involve youth in the planning of things and being involved at more than just a participant level, where you can have youth teach technology classes or come in and be involved in youth and teen advisory boards. And I think that there has been a lot of there's been a lot of or there can be a lot of opportunity in libraries for youth to be involved in multiple levels, where they might not be able to do that in more traditional classroom settings.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But by the same token, I've talked to a lot of folks that have a hard time sort of leveling up the sort of connected programs that they're doing, with like access to like a formalized mentor system, or access to technology and resources, because they have a hard time communicating the connected learning research and impact to administrators. So what would you say to all the teen librarians out there that are doing this amazing work but have a hard time communicating it to administrators? 5 sentences are left about why connected learning is awesome.
Go ahead, Mimi.
I'm happy to jump into that. Yeah, I do think it's challenging because, like a lot of other learning approaches that are specific technology or technique, connected learning is more of a learning approach and a philosophy that needs to be adapted to the local institution. So you can't just say, this thing in and it's going to change everything. It really requires the initiative, librarians and youth, to take it up and adapt. So I think it is more challenging to communicate than if it was a specific technology, for example. But the way that I like to talk about connected learning, and I hope is accessible to people, is really to stress that it's about mobilizing today's technologies in the most effective way possible to make progressive and real-world people. And libraries have such a central role to play, particularly because of the important role reaching youth who may not necessarily be well connected or have a positive relationship to their schooling environment. I think libraries already, as Crystle has described, are sites of interest-driven and progressing and are very, very philosophically aligned. But it's really about saying, how can you take today's technology, which are about social connection, ability to have voice in the wider world, to create really progressive vision of learning that libraries have held, for decades now. It's really about taking advantage of online tools and technologies to build capacity libraries for bringing in expertise, social communities, and connections to opportunity that really expand the reach of a local institution. Again, a vision of having learning being seamless with life and seeing if we can use technologies to really serve that vision.
Thank you, Mimi. Did everyone get that? And that'll be a good tool to add to our toolkit when we talk to our administrators. So on the flip side of that, I've also spoken with YS youth services, other youth services coordinators and managers that have had a hard time communicating this to their staff. It can be a pretty different sort of model for some libraries. So would you have a different sort of approach to framing that for that group of people, or would it be the same?
So I think that, there's different ways of framing it. One is sort of at the broader philosophical and vision layer that I just described, but I also think there's a way of concrete and practical and not seeming so big and airy. And that's just to say that, a lot of times when we talk about connected learning in libraries, we talk about these, big maker spaces and, tabs that have been opened up, the UMedia and so on. And those are really great flagship examples. But the reality, I think, as Crystle has been signaling, is that, it's happening right now in libraries all over the country in big and small ways. And it's really important to remember that small changes can make a big difference in the lives of young people. Like a very small and incremental librarian or an educator can be life-changing for youth, because it's really about finding that sweet spot in the things they're really caring, that connection to opportunity and to learning. So some very simple examples, like the production principle, can be as simple as having a scanner that young people can use, a podcast setup, or it doesn't have to be about building a whole new media lab, but some resources that support production and public self-expression. Very simple, very easy, supporting kids blogging or podcasting online. These are not heavy lifts from a medical or a resourcing perspective. Another example is just really focusing on relationship for young people, what we call social capital in the social sciences. So instead of just thinking about delivering information, knowledge, how can you connect young people to the relationships that are going to interest, that center around purpose and opportunity? And these are doing every day. We're just trying to provide a frame in order to validate these kinds of approaches, services that we think are more and more valuable in an era when the information itself is abundant, easily accessible. Those relationships that are really going to guide young people to maximize these opportunities are the things that they really, really need right now.
Mhm. Um, so I guess getting back to the Future of Teens in Libraries report, obviously it talks a lot about connected learning. And how would you describe your reaction to that report and maybe how connected learning is framed throughout that sort of overall discussion? Mhm. And so we've talked a little bit about sort of what's already going on in libraries and what we could be doing. But I guess thinking about connected learning more broadly, have there been, or I guess I'm sure there's been many, but can you talk about how connected learning, working with teens in connected learning and the research that you've done with teens has maybe impacted you personally or professionally?
So do you want to take that, or do you want me to? Oh, yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, the connected learning model is somewhat unique within educational research in that it was really developed uh, in through engagement and observation and hang out with young people in sites where they really own the agenda. So in a way, the whole model is driven by that youth-centered focus. And I think what is interesting and what I really liked going back to the report is really that acknowledgement of that as an orienting philosophy for this the vision of libraries of the future is that involvement of young people not only in trying to meet them where they are in their interests, but in having them be an active shaping force. One example in our current research is, we do have participants in our design research and design experiments who come from the youth communities that we've studied. So, for example, we're collaborating closely with some of the leadership of the Harry Potter Alliance and some of the leadership in the gaming communities that we've been involved in. And we really see that our work as educators is pretty seamless in some ways with those passionate hobbyists and experts in these communities of interest, and often those people are youth. So it's been really fabulous to have an opportunity to work directly with these amazing young people.
Mhm. Um, So, yeah, I guess on the same theme of the report, it mentions a lot that serving teens needs to be a priority, not just for the teen librarians, but for the whole, community, the library community, but the community that the library is embedded in. Um, so, do you have examples of or ideas about other environments? that have had the similar experience, and I guess any connected learning experience is, but how to sort of onboard people that may not feel like serving teens in this way has been their priority or responsibility in the past.
Well, I think some museums have tried to do this and tried to change to a more teen, youth, family-oriented focus to try to bring teens and youth in more readily. And I think that they've done this in a variety of ways through the creation of, apps and interactive activities in the museum. And, they're a very specific kind of institution because of, of the information that they present and how they're presenting it. But I think that it's, and part of it is how that they've tried to market themselves as a place where, teens and youth can come and are welcome. And the Field Museum in Chicago, I think, has worked hard at this. They have very strong summer learning programs, and they've done them both physically and virtually to include more students or more youth and teens. And I think it's I think that the way that they've approached it is kind of a holistic from trying to run from the ground up through from the actual people who are going to do the programs all the way through how they're marketing the museum itself and trying to bring everyone in on board that teens are an important demographic to serve. And so that's probably one of the institutions where I've seen it the most. You see it in teen and youth-facing groups that are, after school groups and things, but that's their essential nature is to serve those communities, so it's a bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like that in libraries too, and maybe some of the folks in our chat box can speak to this, but sort of moving to a connected learning framework seems to push sort of a cultural shift maybe in libraries and how we approach learning and sort of bringing everyone on board to support that. So it's interesting, and maybe folks in the chat box can speak to this too. It's interesting how folks have sort of pushed that cultural shift in their institutions and how that's been successful and what challenges they've had with that. So this is probably and hopefully Mimi comes back because it'd be great to hear from both of you about this, but just from your general research on connected learning, whether it's online or in schools or in libraries, how are folks measuring outcomes in assessments? How do you capture connected learning and communicate it back?
Oh, this would definitely be let's see if Mimi comes back, because this is definitely a Mimi question.
Okay, so while we wait for Mimi, I'm going to ask you part two. Maybe Crystle, you could speak to this. So libraries, of course, have limited budgets, and I know Mimi spoke to the importance of, not feeling like you need to have a maker space to be doing connected learning, but how can librarians demonstrate their impact on teens, with teens through a connected learning framework?
I think that demonstrating the impact is, connected learning for the youth is a very individualized thing. It's people, it's the impact on each individual youth. So I think one of the ways that you can demonstrate impact is, to collect stories about youth who you feel through your practice have really benefited from or have come back. I taught games and libraries course several times with library students, and some of the stories that I've heard over time are things like having teen councils, and then the impact of youth having agency in those situations and what that does for the programs and what it does for the youth themselves. And so I think it's a documenting kind of the cases of the youth who you see interacting with that you interact with as a teen librarian, and how the connected learning framework and supporting their interests has impacted them as individuals. And as an ethnographer, the power of like descriptive cases like Maria's and several of my other participants, like that's a very important part of ethnography, and I think it's a very important part of showing how connected learning can, how librarians can show the impact of connected learning to others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know in my own area, just sort of sharing those like case studies, for lack of a better word, about how what we're doing is, pushing kids forward in their personal and academic lives is really powerful for our administrators to hear. And I'd be curious for the librarians that are with us today, if you have stories or techniques that you use to sort of demonstrate what you're doing, the impact of what you're doing through connected learning with the higher ups. That'd be really interesting to hear about. And it looks like we lost Mimi again, but hopefully she'll make it back. So, Crystle, I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're the only one here, but I'd love it if the people in the chat box would participate in this too. I had a great conversation. I've had a few good conversations with people lately, and also with my President's Program group. I should mention my President's Program at the annual conference in Las Vegas is all related to connected learning. So we'll be kind of talking about what connected learning in libraries means, but we'll also have sort of connected learning coaches there to talk through maybe different ways that connected learning might look in your library based on specific examples that people bring. So I think it should be really cool. Okay, plug aside. Here's the interesting and sort of thought-provoking exercise that people have been doing. And it is talking about their own experience with connected learning. So it could be something in your life now, or it could be thinking back to your 15-year-old self. Can you describe a personal experience that you've had with connected learning? What does your connected learning, a connected learning journey look like for you?
Well, I would say that one of the probably most pivotal connected learning experiences that I had is kind of what led me to the dissertation research, which led me to where I am today. And that would be that I had started playing video games fairly late in life. I was not a gamer as a kid. I didn't start gaming until I was in college, and through friends and through my husband, who's an avid gamer. And as I was watching him game and he was kind of teaching me how to game, I got really interested in how people found information around games. And so this was while I was still in my library program at Wayne State University in Detroit. And one of my faculty members there, I was talking to him about this, and he was the one who kind of put me in mind of pursuing a PhD and thinking about what I could do to research this. And it wasn't something I had been thinking about at the time. I'd actually been planning on becoming an academic librarian. And so he started talking to me about a program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison where they have a big game center. And his kind of mentorship and him being very
Sure. I was just thinking about this too. I'm a mom with two teenagers, so this is my everyday life these days. I think as parents, we get real insight of spaces that kids are trying to navigate as part of their interests. And, one example, my daughter, who's a sophomore in high school, playing viola since I think about fourth grade. She got introduced to it, and uh, so her entry point was through the school environment. None of us at home played until she started. And, the teacher who was school, and then, she went to a middle school that had a pretty good music, and so she was playing consistently. So it was very school driven. And then eventually she joined the LA Youth Orchestra and started developing a stronger peer group around that interest. So it became, again, connecting the spheres from the more school-centered to the peer side, and, connecting out to broader opportunities for publicity in her school environment. So, in her case, it was almost like the school drove it, the opportunity, and then it sustained her interest. It wasn't actually an interest-connected learning environment. It was a way that she discovered an interest through these other supports. And I quite think she would never have continued with this without all of that connectivity across multiple spheres. So now she has a supportive peer group. She has environments where she gets recognized. She sees it as a pathway to opportunity because the college, counselors are saying it's good to have, an interest like this. So that's an example of an interest that was cultivated through these connections across multiple spaces. Now, her other passionate interest is surfing, and I would say that was much more driven by her family and so on, and has very high stakes in her peer community here in LA, and is more of what you would think of as a classic peer and interest-driven pursuit. Are really trying to the academic and the career relevant. So she's also photography because of interest, and we're trying to connect internship this summer that would enable her to really between what she's personally passionate about, which is her surfing, and the kinds of skill development opportunities that will serve her in her academic and career success down the line. Yes. So I think, and I'm hearing folks in the chat too, that, the challenge with active learning is because it's so diverse, the kinds of interests that kids have and how you can support those interests, that it can be a little bit overwhelming without some concrete strategies for moving this forward. And I think, what we've seen in our partnership with the U Media Learning Labs, for example, is that there's a few librarians have been doing and really learning from young people have helped make this broad philosophy much more applicable. So one is really having librarians, and mentors at libraries be a conduit for connecting young people to opportunities in the community that they wouldn't otherwise know about, whether that's internships, competitions, opportunities, ways of, just providing that support and encouragement. So all of these, invitations that young people have, like, enter the spoken word competition, design competition, game, design uh, effort, and young aren't lacking invitations to participate in these things. A really, really big hurdle for kids to actually step up and to put their work out there, to apply for, and found that of the librarian, of the mentor in connecting kids and encouraging kids, supporting, making sure they show up, all these things are really incredibly huge. So that's about, again, what is this young person interested in? Oh, they're interested in photography, and there's this interesting youth challenge being sponsored by, Kodak or whatever it is. These are the kinds of things that can be incredible. Like, one of these is life-changing, one of these connections. And the other is online learning resources. So I think librarians are already incredibly well equipped, obviously, to be navigators of the online information world. I think the one additional step is to say, what about these social communities? What about these opportunities to share your work online, to gain an audience? So, for example, if there's a group of kids who are in or media production, just putting that work online in a community and get feedback to build real activity. This is another huge thing that libraries can provide, that sort of safe space. These are the right kinds of online communities, publication platforms, venues for you to put your work out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, Mimi. I think just going that extra, like, tiny step of encouraging kids, and I think that's so true of adults too. Just reminding people that they should take that extra step because they do have the capacity to successfully do those things can be huge. So, Mimi, when we lost you for a second, we were talking about outcome measurement, which is obviously really important. So, have you seen examples of whether in libraries or education or elsewhere where people were able to successfully measure and assess connected learning? Or I guess, of course, you've seen examples, but
Yeah,
how,
I think
what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and this is something that, we've been, again, in our partnership with YOUmedia, really trying to push on these assessment measures, because I think youth serving programs and libraries, educational programs, they tend to be a
Oh no, we lost Mimi again. Hopefully she'll be back in a second. So we're kind of nearing the end of our time here. To folks in the chat box, are there issues that you'd like to go back to, or questions that you might, that you'd really like to see addressed in these last few minutes together? Or even ideas that, we could expand upon?
Elaine had a question that I thought I would address, if that's all right.
Awesome, go for it.
Okay. Elaine had asked that she was thinking that the teens that were already attending libraries and excited by the level of engagement would be the same teens that would be able to bridge their educational interests. And I would say that that's true of some of them, but definitely not all of them. There's also a lot, having worked with a lot of youth and teen groups and kind of communities where, especially professional wrestling, is a community where if if your friends who are local know and they aren't also wrestling fans, it can cause a lot of social stigma. And I've also seen this in, I'm working with a group called Califonar, and I'm doing research on this teen group that is participating in a photography class. And when they first started running the class, and it's actually digital storytelling, so they're doing photography and they're learning about doing narrative through photography. And one of the things that they tried to do at the beginning was get the youth to post on Twitter, and nobody wanted to. And it was a lot about kind of protecting your interest in photography from your larger peer group, not knowing how that would be received, and being interested in photography but not really wanting to share it with the world. And so I think that for a lot of teens and youth, there's a lot of like really latent interests that they have but they don't want to tell a lot of people about. And I think that if you can get them to open up, which is sometimes challenging, that you can help them see the value in the things they're doing and help them find resources, et cetera, like we was talking about. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities there, even for the ones who are very interested. And I think just because they're very interested doesn't mean that they always understand how to get that thing that they're interested in valued back in institutional or academic settings.
And, I think you're bringing up such an important point that like navigating what that mentor relationship looks like for each kid is such a different animal for every kid. And even if we do offer, those safe platforms and areas for kids to connect, like the ways that they want to connect and how that feeds back to their peer circle beyond library world can be really, really different for every kid.
Well, and it's a lot about trust building, and that's challenging on such an individual level. But once you make those connections, it can be so impactful, especially for the youth who are a bit shy about the things they are enjoying or doing, that it's really worth the challenge to make the connection. But it can be very challenging, and for youth especially who are already having like disaffiliation problems or disengagement issues with school, that there's always that, you can't make whatever it is like you're doing feel too much like school, because then they have a tendency to withdraw. And so it's a very complicated balance, I think, in order to get that all worked out. But it's totally worth it if you can, once you manage to make the connection. And a lot of times the connection happens, I think, through offering youth agency in these kind of processes where, programming and things that makes them feel like they're very valued. And I think that's very important.
Definitely. I see we have another question from Elaine. Yay, Elaine. She's asking if you can discuss how targeting interest groups limits the community of students, and what other pathways there might be to engage.
Do you want to give this one a try, Mimi?
Sure. Yeah, one of the biggest when we talk about interest-driven learning, because, inherently young people's interests are diverse. You can't, it's very difficult to tailor learning environments to serve every kid's interest. So I think the way that we've been thinking about this is, twofold. One is that be attentive to your population, to tailor the interest you want to serve. So, for example, like the maker movement, I know that, definitely librarians to incorporate maker culture, but often, maker culture can have a very, particular demographic appeal. And so if you're really trying to reach, kids who might not identify with that sort of maker culture and in the branded maker movement, to really engage in creative activities that could appeal to minority youth or low-income youth, if those are your target audience, attentive to the populations you're really wanting to reach, or to girls who might really be attracted to a really focused kind of space, something like music or fashion or other forms of creative production could be more appealing. I think this support a lot of local a kid could have. What's amazing about the internet is that you can find a community of interest for online now. And so if you think of, um, support that, and I think that's the under-tapped opportunity, and there's a lot of policy and safety issues and other things that we have to resolve, connecting kids, institutions to, social communities online. But the reality is that that's where the capacity and the opportunity is. And they're already doing that, right, from home. So from home, they're on their Tumblrs, they're on their game accounts, they're on their social Vines and social media channels. And so how can we acknowledge there are these interest communities online where young people are connected, and that's the challenge that we're trying to charge hard at on our own design work, is to understand what could really help step with their young people.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like Elaine has a question related to that about librarians engaging on internet platforms with students. And I think this goes back to so much of the thread of what we've been talking about today is, knowing, really forming that relationship with your kids and knowing what's appropriate or what they might need in diverse social media, but also skill building and other.
I think that the reality is that there are so many different kinds of online offerings, and we haven't necessarily done the best job of figuring out which ones are for educators to engage in, when are creepy or inappropriate for us as educators to participate in directly, but also to connect youth to. And I think that really is the work moving forward, to have librarians and other educators be actively engaged in the interest-driven spaces of youth, not in sort of a nosy takeover but in understanding, what are the opportunities that we supporting, engaging, how can we participate authentically as, creative and passionate hobby ourselves in those spaces. So I think that's the real trick. I did just want to loop back to the outcomes thing for just a second, because I know I got disconnected in the middle of that, if that's okay. So, what we're really advocating for in terms of outcomes for libraries in this sort of space is to really look at, the kids' knowledge and skills-based outcomes. And of course, programs should capture that. So if you're teaching media literacy, you're going to have outcomes around media literacy that you're going to care about. But we're also really advocating for programs to look at what we're calling social measures. So these are very simple. They don't require the head kind of psychometric complicated assessments, but just track of whether your kids have developed relationships centered on interest or opportunity. Have they connected programs through your spaces with a mentor, an adult, another hobbyist, a peer in their area of interest? Have they connected to a new opportunity, their involvement in your program? And these are things that are really easy to keep track of and to ask kids. And these we think are the most, in many ways, the most important for connected learning, because they are unique to the connected learning model. Now, the skills and content measures are the skills and content, but they're not, especially when you're being evaluated side by side with programs that are much more structured and formal, they're not necessarily where you're going to see the biggest transformation compared to the social capital measures, which are really at the center of the connected learning model.
A little over our time, so we'll have to wrap things up. Are there any last ideas that you guys would like to share? As librarians boldly move forward with connected learning?
I'll just say, we're really, really looking for, we're really partnership, librarians who want to dive in and help design these new kinds of programs, environments, ways of connecting. So I really encourage you to, if you're interested in being in this early, in the early phases really of making this a reality in practice, we hope you'll reach out to us and other members of our community.
Amy, that cut off for me a little bit at the end, so if you could put that try again or put it in the chat box, either or, that would be awesome. And Crystle, anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just saying, I really hope that, yeah. Oh, I was just inviting folks to please reach out to us and others in our community if you'd like to be part of the building of some of these new experiments and efforts.
Thank you. And Crystle. Yay, that's awesome. Thanks so much to both of you. And I'm sorry, it looks like, do we have a question from John really quick before we bid adieu today? John, go ahead and ask your question. Sorry to make you retype if that's what happened. So John's question, constructing ways for teens to engage connected learning in non-traditional ways. So not necessarily including a library. If you guys don't mind tackling that in, in 30 seconds, that would be wonderful and appreciated.
Yeah, so I think in a lot of ways, young people are already engaged in a lot of autodidactic learning, and without educators in the picture necessarily. So, I think I'm not sure if the question is as, just adults without our educator hat, but the other way to think about it is, I think we're in a world where all of us have a role to play in supporting young people's learning, regardless of where we are. And the internet provides us this new stage to make that happen. So, whatever communities of interest you're participating in, these are all places to reach youth. So I've been trying to encourage all my friends who are experts in, whatever it is they may do in their professional or their personal lives, that, they have a responsibility, that we all have a responsibility to help newcomers, to help elevate our culture, to encourage people to get better at what they do, and to answer questions on Q&A forums, or to take a young person under your wing. I mean, these are things that in this world of network connectivity, the educating of young people is really, I think, responsible for anybody that has knowledge.
Thank you, Mimi, for answering that question. Okay, so I could go on all day. I'm sure we all could, but please stay tuned to the YALSA blog for more connected learning discussions. Visit the Connected Learning TV website, and also come to the President's Program, and we'll be talking all connected learning for hours and hours, so I hope to see you there. Thank you so much, Crystle and Mimi, for joining us today, and thanks again to everyone who joined us. Have an awesome rest of your Monday. Bye, everyone.